The sanctuary of Elysium floated in the dead space between empires, a monument to a peace forged over millennia. Here, the great powers of the galaxy, beings of light, crystal, and perfect logic, had gathered to dictate the terms of surrender to a young, belligerent species from the galactic fringe. The war was over. The stalemate had been a fluke. It was time for the upstart humans to learn their place. But what if the stalemate wasn't an accident? What if the peace talks were not a negotiation, but the final move in a war they had already lost? What happens when the children you came to punish reveal they have been the masters of the game all along? This is the story of the day humanity walked out of the truce talks and brought the galaxy to its knees. Before we witness the fall of empires, take a moment to subscribe and empower our mission. Your support is the energy that fuels this channel. All right, find your seat at the table. Let's begin the story. The human delegation arrived last. It was a calculated insult, and everyone in the grand atrium of the sanctuary of Elysium knew it. For an hour, the great powers of the sector had waited. Arbiter Lyra of the Lumini, a being of soft, radiant light held in a vaguely humanoid form, pulsed with serene impatience. The chorus mind of the geode ascendancy, Crystallos, a towering crystalline monolith, resonated with low, discordant chimes. Prime Axiom Unit 734 of the Signon synthesis, a being of flawless chrome and cold logic, simply stood motionless, calculating the statistical probability of this delay being a deliberate affront. It was 97.3%. Finally, the atrium doors hissed open, and the three humans walked in. Their presence was a void in the shimmering, clicking, and humming splendor of the hall. They wore simple, unadorned black uniforms of the Terran Federation. No glowing robes, no anti-gravitic platforms, no displays of power. It was the attire of a species that either had no power to display or needed none. Ambassador Valerius led the way. His face was carved from stone, his eyes a deep, unreadable gray. To his right, Admiral Kenji Tanaka walked with the stiff, coiled readiness of a predator, his gaze sweeping the room, assessing threats the others couldn't see. To his left, Dr. Lena Petrova clutched a simple data slate, her expression one of focused, academic detachment. They were the upstarts, the primitives from the Sol system who had somehow fought the combined fleets of three conclave powers to a bloody, 18-month stalemate. A cosmic anomaly, a statistical improbability that was about to be corrected. Arbiter Lyra floated towards them, her light softening into a benevolent glow. It was the same look one might give a disobedient child. Ambassador Valerius. Her voice was like the chiming of soft bells. We are pleased you have finally come to accept the conclave's generous terms for peace. We have come to hear them, Arbiter. Valerius replied, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb her light rather than reflect it. There is nothing to hear, hissed the brood sovereign of the chitin swarm, Cthar, from a nearby alcove, its mandibles clicking impatiently. Its insectoid form was a masterpiece of natural aggression. Only to accept. Valerius simply offered a slow, deliberate nod and proceeded into the negotiation chamber. The doors, carved from a single, impossibly vast piece of solidified spacetime, sealed behind them with a silent, final hum. The chamber was dominated by a vast, circular table of polished black stone that drank the light from the room. The five great powers were already seated. They had left the sixth seat, the human seat, conspicuously empty. Another small, but clear, message. Valerius walked to the seat and stood behind it, but did not sit. Tanaka and Petrova stood behind him, a silent, unmoving honor guard. Arbiter Lyra began the proceedings, her voice filling the chamber with a sense of ancient, unassailable authority. The unnecessary conflict initiated by the Terran Federation has caused significant disruption to galactic harmony. However, in our wisdom, we have chosen a path of reintegration over retribution. She gestured to the Signon delegate. Prime Axiom Unit 734 spoke, its voice a flawless, synthesized monotone. Analysis concludes Terran industrial output is inefficient and ecologically chaotic. To ensure optimal resource allocation and prevent further planetary mismanagement, all Terran inning and manufacturing operations in the Outer Rim will henceforth be managed by the synthesis. This is logical. The chorus mind of the geode ascendancy, Crystallos, resonated next. Its voice was a complex harmony that the translators struggled to contain. The crystals sing of an imbalance created by the war. To restore this universal harmony, the Terran Federation will provide an annual tribute of 10,000 metric tons of refined heavy metals and 5,000 metric tons of helium. 3. This tribute is not punitive. It is therapeutic. The brood sovereign Cthar was more direct. The swarm requires new worlds for the next spawning. Your fledgling colonies on Proxima B and C are adjacent to our territory. Their ecosystems are undeveloped. They will be ceded to the Chiton for proper development. One by one, they laid out the terms of humanity's systematic surrender. It was the complete dismantling of a civilization, gift-wrapped in the language of benevolence. Their economy would be controlled. Their territory would be forfeit. Their military would be neutered and placed under conclave oversight. Their children would be educated in conclave traditions. Through it all, Valerius stood in perfect, unnerving silence. He listened. He nodded occasionally, as if taking mental notes. He showed no anger, no fear, no emotion at all. When they were finished, a heavy, expectant silence filled the chamber. Arbiter Lyra turned her gentle glow upon him. These are the terms, Ambassador. They are generous. They are final. You may sit and signify your acceptance. The chamber waited. They expected him to finally break, to plead, to bargain, to protest his species' fate. Valerius did none of those things. Instead, a very faint, very cold smile touched his lips. No, he said. The word was so quiet, so simple, it took the universal translators a moment to process it. When they did, a ripple of disbelief went around the table. Valerius slowly walked around the empty chair and placed his simple data slate on the black stone table. It looked like a child's toy. Thank you, honored members, for your clarity, he said, his voice calm and even. It is important that we all understand each other perfectly. Now, allow me to be equally clear. The Terran Federation has different terms. A low hiss of what could only be laughter came from the Chiton delegate. Valerius ignored it. The terms are as follows, he stated, his voice cutting through the disdain like a surgeon's blade. 1. The immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all conclave military and civilian assets from a 50-light-year radius around all Terran Federation territories. This sphere will henceforth be designated the Terran Exclusion Zone. Any unauthorized vessel crossing this border will be considered an act of war. The amusement in the chamber curdled into confusion. Arbiter Lyra's light flickered. Ambassador, that region contains 3 of our primary sensor relays, and they will be evacuated. Valerius cut her off. 2. He continued, his voice dropping, becoming harder. Control of the Cygnus, Vega, and Elysium hyperspace lanes will be ceded to the Terran Navy for security and regulatory oversight. All non-Terran traffic will be subject to inspection and tariffs. Now the confusion was turning to raw anger. Those were not just hyperspace lanes. They were the 3 most critical trade arteries in the entire sector. To control them was to control the economic lifeblood of dozens of worlds. 3. A permanent seat will be granted to the Terran Federation on the Galactic Security Council, with full and unconditional veto power. 4. Valerius said, his gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. The Conclave will issue a formal, public apology for its unprovoked aggression against a pre-contact species and pay war reparations in the amount of 5 trillion universal credits to offset the costs of this defensive action. And finally, the 5th point, the one that shattered the last vestiges of their millennia-old composure. The Terran Federation will be formally and immediately recognized as a Tier 1 galactic power, with all associated rights, privileges, and immunities. For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute, stunned silence. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the chamber erupted. The Chiton brood sovereign slammed its chitinous claw on the table, cracking the black stone. Madness. This is the desperate howling of a cornered, filthy vermin. Prime Axiom Unit 734's optical sensors glowed a dull, furious red. Recalculating. Probability of acceptance for these terms is calculated at 0.00001%. This is not a negotiation. It is a declaration of insanity. Arbiter Lyra's form flared with brilliant, angry light. Ambassador, this is an outrageous insult. You are in no position to make demands of this conclave. Valerius remained standing, an island of impossible calm in a sea of incandescent fury. On the contrary, Arbiter, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. We are in the only position that matters. Admiral Tanaka, who had been as still as a statue, leaned forward. He spoke just loud enough for the table's sensitive audio pickups to catch his words. His voice was a quiet, chilling whisper that sliced through the rage like a shard of ice. You seem to be under the impression, honored members, that the stalemate was accidental. That one sentence froze the room. Valerius looked at the fuming, disbelieving delegates. Their ancient minds were struggling to process a reality that did not compute. These are not proposals, he said, his voice now as cold and hard as iron. They are the terms of your surrender. He picked up his data slate. You have 72 standard hours to broadcast your unconditional acceptance of these terms to the entire galaxy. If you fail to do so, we will consider the armistice void, and we will resume hostilities. I assure you, you do not want us to resume hostilities. He turned his back on them. A gesture of such profound contempt that the air in the room seemed to crystallize. This meeting is over, he declared. With Tanaka and Petrova flanking him, Ambassador Valerius walked with measured steps toward the great doors. Wait! Arbiter Lyra called out, her voice a brilliant, desperate chime. You cannot simply leave. Peace must be achieved. This is madness. Valerius paused at the door. He turned back to look at them one last time, the masters of the galaxy, now sputtering in confused rage. Peace will be achieved, he said, and the cold certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any weapon they had ever faced. The only question is whether it will be the easy way or the hard way. The doors hissed shut. The 5 most powerful beings in the sector were left sitting in a stunned, deafening silence, a single, impossible question hanging in the air. What in the name of the void had just happened? For the next 24 hours, the conclave was a hive of frantic, furious activity. They dismissed the human ultimatum as an elaborate, insane bluff. It is a psychological tactic, Prime Axiom Unit 734 concluded after analyzing 1.2 million historical precedents of desperate gambits. Its report was circulated to all member worlds. The human species, when faced with overwhelming odds, has a documented history of engaging in high-risk, low-probability actions. They believe this show of false confidence will grant them a more favorable negotiation position. A fatal miscalculation on their part, Kthar hissed in the emergency session that followed. Then we will show them what real confidence looks like. What real power looks like. Move the 3rd, 5th, and 9th battle fleets to the edge of their so-called exclusion zone. The moment their ridiculous deadline expires, we will not resume a stalemate. We will begin an extermination. The orders were sent. Fleets comprising thousands of the most advanced warships in the galaxy were mobilized. The most sophisticated intelligence networks, capable of reading the heat signature of a single being from a light year away, were tasked with a single objective: find the hidden weakness. Find the source of this insane bluff. They scanned every human world, every ship, every scrap of communication. They found nothing. Nothing but a primitive species, barely a step up from the molten core of their own planet. Their technology was laughably crude. Their fleet was a pathetic collection of barely FTL vessels. It only infuriated them more. On the bridge of the Terran Federation flagship Retribution, a ship that did not officially exist according to any conclave intelligence, Valerius, Tanaka, and Petrova watched the countdown timer on the main view screen. 6 hours, 14 minutes, 32 seconds. All nodes report stable and drawing power from their 0-point modules, Dr. Petrova said, her voice betraying not a hint of tense. Ion. Project Chimera is fully operational. The field is holding at a nominal containment level of 2%. Ready for full activation on your command, Admiral. Conclave punitive fleets are massing at the 50 light-year mark, Admiral Tanaka noted, a grim, predatory smile touching his lips. Fleet dispositions are exactly as projected in our wargame simulations. They are arrogant, predictable. A young ensign on the comm station, his face slick with nervous sweat, turned to the ambassador. Sir, Ambassador Valerius, what if they agree? What if they accept the terms before the deadline? Valerius looked at the young man, his gray eyes holding a deep, ancient sadness that seemed out of place on a human face. "They won't, son," he said quietly. "Their pride will not allow it. They have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. They have forgotten what it feels like to be challenged. They have forgotten that the universe does not reward pride. It punishes it. They have to be shown." The final hour ticked by with agonizing slowness. On the bridge of the Lumini flagship Starlight, a vessel made of pure, woven light, Arbiter Lyra watched her own countdown timer reach 0. Her form pulsed with righteous indignation. "The deadline has passed," she chimed, her voice resonating with cold finality. "Their arrogance is now answered. Transmit the command code to the punitive fleet. Teach the humans the cost of pride." Her communications officer, a lesser Lumini, bowed its glowing head. "Transmitting command code now." He tapped his console of pure energy. And nothing happened. "Report," Lyra demanded, her light beginning to pulse with a discordant, anxious rhythm. I don't understand, Arbiter," the officer stammered, its own light flickering. "FTL communications are down. All channels are silent." A low, piercing shriek began to echo through the bridge, an alarm that hadn't been heard in 1,000 years. "Navigation is offline," another officer cried out. "Our main singularity drive, it's shut down. We're dead in space." Across the sector, on chitin hive ships the size of moons, on geode monoliths that had drifted between the stars for ages, on the cold, perfect logic vessels of the Signan synthesis, the same scene of panic and utter confusion was unfolding. It was not just their fleets. It was everything. Every ship, every station, every FTL comm buoy across a region of space 100 light-years wide simply stopped working. The galaxy, for the first time in recorded history, had gone silent and still. Then, a single, clear channel opened. On the main view screen of every paralyzed bridge, every panicked command center, the calm, unyielding face of Ambassador Valerius appeared. He was no longer on the peace station. He was on the bridge of a warship, a vessel of dark, sharp angles and deadly purpose, surrounded by the quiet, terrifying efficiency of a human military crew. "Honored members of the conclave," he began, his voice devoid of any diplomatic warmth. "Welcome to the Terran exclusion zone." A star map materialized next to him. It showed the shimmering, now fully visible bubble of the exclusion zone. But it also showed something else. 3 bright, unmistakable lines that cut directly, brutally, through the bubble. The Vega, Cygnus, and Elysium hyperspace lanes. The galactic arteries. For the last 18 months of the war, Dr. Petrova's voice explained, layered over the transmission with the cold precision of a lecture. "Our forces were not just fighting you to a stalemate. They were deploying the Chimera network, a series of 4,317 subspace resonance anchors. When activated in sequence, they generate a cascading chronoton particle field. This field inhibits all known forms of Alcubierre-based drive signatures. It makes faster-than-light travel impossible." Then, Admiral Tanaka appeared, standing beside Valerius. His face was like granite. "You command fleets," he said, his voice a low, rumbling growl that promised violence. "We control the space between fleets. As of this moment, your empires are cut in half. Your supply lines are severed. Your fleets are isolated. Your economies will collapse in a matter of weeks. Your authority is an illusion." Valerius stepped forward again, his face filling the screen. "Our original terms are no longer on the table," he declared. "Those were the price for peace. The price for your survival is higher." He outlined the new terms. Unconditional acceptance of all original demands. The immediate and verifiable dismantling of the entire punitive fleet currently stranded at the border. And a new round of war reparations, double the original amount, to be paid in refined materials and technology transfers. Silence. The ancient, proud, powerful masters of the galaxy were adrift in a sea of their own arrogant making, their fleets crippled, their empires fractured. Trapped, helpless, on the dark bridge of the Starlight, Arbiter Lyra, a being made of pure, eternal light, felt a coldness she had never known. She looked at the calm, determined face of the human on her screen. The primitive, the upstart, the new master of the galaxy. She gave the order, her voice a broken chime. "Broadcast, our unconditional surrender. The war hadn't ended today. It had ended 18 months ago, the moment the first Chimera anchor had been secretly deployed under the cover of a meaningless skirmish. The aliens just hadn't realized it. Humanity had not come to the sanctuary of Elysium to negotiate a peace. They had come to collect the victory they had already won. The sanctuary of Elysium floated in the dead space between empires, a monument to a peace forged over millennia. Here, the great powers of the galaxy, beings of light, crystal, and perfect logic, had gathered to dictate the terms of surrender to a young, belligerent species from the galactic fringe. The war was over. The stalemate had been a fluke. It was time for the upstart humans to learn their place. But what if the stalemate wasn't an accident? What if the peace talks were not a negotiation, but the final move in a war they had already lost? The ancient, proud, powerful masters of the galaxy were adrift in a sea of their own arrogant making, their fleets crippled, their empires fractured. Trapped, helpless, on the dark bridge of the starlight, Arbiter Lyra, a being made of pure, eternal light, felt a coldness she had never known. She looked at the calm, determined face of the human on her screen. The primitive, the upstart, the new master of the galaxy. She gave the order, her voice a broken chime. Broadcast, our unconditional surrender. The war hadn't ended today. It had ended 18 months ago, the moment the first Chimera anchor had been secretly deployed under the cover of a meaningless skirmish. The aliens just hadn't realized it. Humanity had not come to the sanctuary of Elysium to negotiate a peace.